Imagine this. It's January 2016 and everywhere you look, articles are popping up talking about this new Half-Life fan game, a new add-on, a standalone expansion. The hype train is very much in full force for this new game, Prospekt. It's supposed to be a breath of fresh air for the Half-Life community. Surely a commercial game like this, whose assets and distribution has been approved by Valve indirectly, has to be one hell of an experience, right? Well, not really. Prospekt's tale is that which I deem a tragedy for the Half-Life community. This would be the first of two tragedies that would strike the community, and they just might be the reason why Valve became more stringent of letting other people use their intellectual property commercially. Because come on, do you really want ratings like these to be plastered across official approved fan-made Half-Life expansions? In 2013, a 23-year-old Richard Seabrook would be let go from the IT company he was working at. He always wanted to become a level designer, but had never made it into the mainstream gaming industry as a professional. After his workplace downsized and let him go, he would come up with a plan. The plan? Apply to work at Valve. He knew Valve's standards were far above the rest of the industry, so for 2 years while working as a bartender, he would work on a mod called Project X. Project X is what became Prospekt later on. In 2015, Richard, now 25, would finish up on this Project X mod. This was his portfolio now, his potential ticket into Valve. Richard mailed Valve a copy of this mod, his dissertation on puzzle design in FPS games, and a cover letter. All of this would be inside an opposing force themed steel briefcase. And after a few months, silence. As ambitious as Richard's method of applying at Valve was, it didn't do quite well enough to get Valve's attention. Project X, now known as Prospekt, was put on Steam Greenlight and surprisingly got approved to be put on there to be sold rather than be available as a free download. Now, it's usual for free mods to be put up on Steam. There were quite a few before this and there came a few after this. But what surprised people was that Valve indirectly had approved a commercial game using their IP and assets to be sold on their storefront. And so, Prospekt would release, and much to Richard's surprise I'm guessing, did not fare well critically with the community. Why? We'll be looking at that in just a minute. But I have to say, Richard's ambitions and motivation is commendable to some extent. Unlike another game developer that I know about, here I don't sense any foul play or sinister motives. I just see a man who bit off more than he could chew. Some people might feel that he did a bad thing by making the game paid instead of free, but I don't really think that. Everyone has the right to sell whatever they want online. The problem is that it seems a little pretentious. Why would one try to sell something that doesn't really have a lot to offer? The reality is that people are more lenient on free mods than they are on a game that they paid for. The whole debacle happened because it got approved by Steam Greenlight and it was put on the storefront and sold for money. If Prospekt was released for free, I don't think anybody would have batted an eye. Nobody would have even remembered today that such a mod even existed. But because Prospekt released as a paid game, it came under heavy fire from all sides, and today we're gonna take a look at what went wrong. If this is the first time you're hearing about this game, then let me set the stage. Prospekt is a Half-Life fan game running on the Source engine released on Steam in February of 2016. It follows the story of Adrian Shephard, the protagonist of Opposing Force, as he is brought back from stasis by the Vortigaunts. And he's tasked out with helping Gordon during the Nova Prospekt chapter of Half-Life 2. And that's pretty much it as far as the story goes. Now, if there's one good example of how not to start a Half-Life game, it's this right here. Half-Life games have a unique way of starting out, usually by train or a G-Man dialogue, but here, Prospekt really drops the ball and gives us the worst first impression. Visually, this whole screen is very irritating. You can barely see what's going on and where you are. Then what these Vortigaunts say is just strange. And it's strange because they're talking like normal human beings. If you've gone through Half-Life 2 and its episodes, Vortigaunts are anything but normal when they talk. They're always mysterious and hint at things only Gordon or us, the player, would understand. Like in the boxcar in Half-Life 2, the Vortigaunt goes,
for the whole railroad. We serve the same mystery.
Which can be anything. Is he talking about G-Man or someone else? What mystery is he talking about? Vortigons tend to be ominous like that. But here, Prospekt Vortigons are like, hey, so this and this happened and Gordon is in Nova Prospekt and you need to help him, and oh, he's not your enemy but the Combine are your enemy, and also this and this happened. Like, this is overexposing the player right from the get-go. These are all lines and dialogues that can be perfectly translated into in-game cutscenes or sequences, some of them even without speaking a single word. All of this just defeats the purpose of storytelling and is exactly the opposite of what Valve would do. In the game, Half-Life 2, exposition is usually kept to a minimum. No character just comes up to you and starts explaining to Gordon what happened while he was away in stasis. Like, Eli doesn't come up to him and go, oh dude, you wouldn't believe what happened. We had like a 7-hour war and it all ended in 7 hours. No, what rather happens is that bits and pieces of information are spoken and it is up to the player to stitch them together and figure out what happened. Moving on, we get teleported into Nova Prospekt. Right away you'll notice that the game uses tone mapping, color grading. While in rare cases it looks alright, but a majority of the time it blows out the colors and the contrast is so high that 80% of the maps look shrouded in darkness. And oh god, these flashback audios.
Maybe they're prepping us for your mom's house. Here, she's a feisty chick.
That's real funny, Davis. I hear the same thing about your wife.
Be careful what you say, man. Oh, and you're...
Flashbacks, be they visual or auditory, are a great way to create depth for a character. It's a storytelling tool that you can use to signify what the character is remembering at a specific point in the story. But from the start and all the way to the finish, Adrian keeps remembering his army dudes either joking around or his higher-ups just saying how deadly Black Mesa operation is gonna be and yada yada yada. The only single moment that this flashback felt kinda cool was at the very end of the game. I'm spoiling the story early, but it's a really old game at this point, so I don't think there's anything to spoil, but at the end, Adrian has to blow up a reactor. Visually, you know this is gonna be the climax of the story. This is the end. By this point, Adrian has gone through so much. And right as you're going down the elevator, you hear your old army squad leader.
Okay, gents, this is it! No more training, no more games, no more bitching! This is what we've been trained for! Rah!
Now this is a good way to use the flashbacks. It legitimately hyped me up. But yeah, these flashbacks happen a lot throughout the story, and when they happen, the screen gets all weird and sometimes it's so bad you can't even see what's going on. And speaking of bad first impressions, Nova Prospekt does not look great, like, at all. The texture work is nice and all, but the way the maps are laid out feels like it's a bunch of elongated halls with narrow corridors attached to them. It just feels empty most of the time. And what was surprising was that the later maps are actually competitively better looking than this. But my biggest disappointment came when I picked up the crowbar. The wrench is supposed to be Adrian's melee weapon, not the crowbar, but I thought at least we'll have new weapons later on. Right? Right? Actually no. There aren't any new weapons in Prospekt. Hell, there aren't even new enemies in Prospekt. The game uses the default Half-Life 2 weapons, and if I could take a guess, I'm guessing the arm and the hands are also from Half-Life 2. So is like Adrian wearing a HEV suit? That's very odd. 1UpD, who you might know from Entropy 02's development team, actually made a mod for this all the way back in 2016. The mod replaces some of the weapons, but unfortunately, it's like using a band-aid to stop a gunshot wound at this point. Speaking of darkness, I love it when I can't see anything in front of me. I've said it many times before, there is a right way to do dark rooms and there's a wrong way. This is the wrong way. Pitch black maps restricts the player's vision to only where the flashlight is shining. That's just not good gameplay design, man. Like, look at this. The outside areas actually looked quite well though. It actually reminded me of the chapter that this game was supposed to take place in. But Prospekt's combat encounters are another issue. First of all, there aren't any new enemies. and the game only uses combine soldiers, elite soldiers, and manhacks and headcrabs, and that's pretty much it. Oh, and in one instance, hunters. Sometimes they're quite alright, but other times the encounters just straight up feel like cheating, like putting you in front of a turret without any cover or throwing a curveball out of nowhere and significantly increasing the difficulty. Now outside, we get to this control panel and press a button. Now what did this button do? I have absolutely no idea. Where should I go next? I have absolutely no idea. I had to look up a walkthrough, but do you see it? No? Come on, it's right there. That's where we're supposed to go. It's plain as day. The game misses an essential game design technique, something I like to call indirect helping. Ever notice from afar you notice a light of a different color and immediately in your mind you know that's where you're supposed to go? Maybe something moves in the environment a little, a sound plays, or maybe something sparks. Anything can be used as an indirect helper. It's not hand-holding, but a hint from the game indirectly telling the player where to go next. Prospekt, unfortunately, has almost zero indirect helpers. Now, as harsh as it sounds, calling this game a map pack from 2007 isn't too far off. Apart from custom assets that I can count on my two hands, there really isn't much going on. Like, for example, in Entropy 02, you had all the weapons and enemies from Half-Life 2, but goddamn, they were updated and looked so good. Hell, take my all-time favorite game for example, Hunt Down the Freeman. Whatever it was, it had custom weapons and enemies in it since day one. Prospekt, however, has no custom enemies or weapons. It's all stock and from the base game. The least I wanted were different hand and arm models, but those are stock too. Now, story-wise, we make it to the teleporter right as Gordon and Alex have gone through and everything's exploding. We also go in and get teleported to a bunch of different places, like this snow place, the City 17 train station, Kleiner's lab, a chapel, and finally the train tracks. Then we end up in some random combine base. Now, this is what I'm talking about. This is a good looking map. At least compared to the earlier maps, this is far better. And there's another problem, with the pacing. Prospekt doesn't really have any space for breathing. Since there's no Gordon, no Barney, no Kleiner, or any character, there aren't any cutscenes or places where you can just stop and just take a breath. It's either shoot combine or press button. That's literally the shortest way I can describe this whole experience. So as we progress further, this combine base we stumbled onto looks like it's built inside an old abandoned factory. Like I mentioned earlier, the combat sequences mostly put you in places where you don't really have a lot of cover, so either you cheese it somehow, or like me, go in guns blazing and just hope for the best. And boy do I love fighting manhacks while getting shot at from 10 miles away. This area looked really cool though, like a research lab from the 60s or 70s that had all these old machines and stuff in it. I like the warm tone of the place. I have to say, this is one of the finer looking places in the game. Then of course it gets dark and we get attacked by a hunter. Oh sorry, 2 hunters. Oh no? Oh sorry, 5 hunters. 5 hunters in an enclosed space like this just doesn't work. Where will you move? Where do I take cover? 1 hunter would have made some sense, but 5? No. Just no. Next we get to see some very nice combine architecture. To the game's defense, I will say that on some occasions the textures with the PBR and the lighting does look quite good. Most of the time it's here in these combine locations, but what I don't understand is why does the start of the game look so bland while these areas look so good? But unfortunately, the great visuals in some of these levels aren't just good enough to fix the broken gameplay design of the game. Again, you keep getting thrown into enemy encounters and new locations without even the tiniest bit of context. Oh yeah, remember I told you about the story of the game about helping Gordon? Nothing happens with that. Why? I don't know. Even if we are helping him, how are we doing it here? Is killing a bunch of combine soldiers enough to help Gordon? There are no key characters in the game to be used as a conveyor of story progression, so you just play the levels for the sake of playing the level. There really isn't a motivation to progress apart from anticipating new levels and visuals. Then we get to this much bigger teleporter. I really liked how it animated and powered on. Now this teleporter leads us to a different looking combine base that's even more shinier than the base before. Now, earlier I said I liked the PBR textures and lighting, but here it's just overkill. It feels like the Combine employ the best janitor in the world to clean their floors, seeing how shiny they are. Notice here how I'm jumping on this random bit of architecture in the air. That's actually how you progress, but again, there is little to no indication that that's where you're supposed to go. If the game was just 10% easier to see and not dark, I could have noticed that there was a hole in the wall that I need to get into. But again, I had to look at a walkthrough to figure this stuff out. Next comes a bunch of platforming areas. They looked kinda nice and played alright, nothing too bad. Then not once or twice, but times and times again, you'll get in a slow-ass elevator only to hear weird dialogues in flashbacks. Like, I appreciate the performance of the voice actors, but the lines themselves aren't just not good. And if they are good, they really feel out of place in this whole game. The issue with the maps of the game is that it keeps reusing the same concepts again and again, just with a different coat of paint. A bunch of corridors, a large room, more corridors, a small room, then more corridors, then another large room. And since this is a Combine base, all of it literally looks the same. It's so repetitive. Then we find another teleporter, and guess where we go? Zen, of course. Zen is more of a cameo than a proper level. It has green gas for a skybox and surprisingly looks even worse than the gold source rendition of these places. With no relation to the story, no significance whatsoever, we head to another teleporter from Zen that takes us back to the Combine base. We get trapped in a magnetic field and get captured, and finally something happened in the story, I guess. So while in our cell, the soldiers get called because of an emergency and G-Man helps us out for some reason. Even though in the beginning the Vortigaunts kept him away from us. Then we reached this place, which was cool because of this awesome looking map of the solar system or something. And then I just waited. And waited. And I waited. Till finally the Combine showed up. This combat sequence just throws soldiers upon soldiers onto you. Squads of soldiers will keep coming into this hall to the point where the difficulty shoots up to the point where I consider the game is cheating. After multiple attempts and a stroke, I finally completed the sequence. Then we get the big twist. We're on a Combine space station and not on Earth at all. I really wish I knew why I'm here because last I remember, we were supposed to help Gordon and he's on Earth. Then again, the game throws us into a wave defense section. This is truly one of the hardest videos I've had to make. Because like the game, the script I wrote originally was so repetitive because the game was like that. For the life of me, I can't really find a way to talk about this game. It's good in rare cases, below average for most, and repetitive at best. The last half of the game is literally the Citadel chapter from Half-Life 2, but instead of one chapter, it's like 5 chapters long. Yes, it looks good, but please man, I just want to see something new now. The end has us in this reactor chamber where we have to overload it while fending off squads of soldiers. You have to keep an eye out because the elite soldiers can fix the overloading, so you have to go back and overload it again. Kinda irritating, but after a while I had it done and the reactor was about to explode, and of course, we get pulled out by the Vortigaunts. Then G-Man comes in again. This time he kills the Vortigaunts and probably diddles Adrian or something, I don't know, and that's Prospekt. This whole thing took me an hour almost to finish, and at the end I'll say that it was all flash but no substance. Look, while this video obviously criticized the game heavily and on the point that this is a paid game that looks like a map pack, I still don't blame Richard, and definitely don't hate him on anything like that, because Prospekt was Richard's genuine effort. Hard work, man hours were put into this game. Richard even made genuine attempts to fix this game post-release, which I respect. But I just think that at the time the game was in development and came out in 2016, Richard was an overzealous indie developer who wanted nothing more than to work at Valve, and this was his resume. One of the biggest lessons we can learn from all of this is to give ourselves a reality check. Realistically think about what we can and cannot do. That doesn't mean you restrict yourself just because you aren't capable. That means you figure out what you can't do and learn to do it. Practice it. Improve yourself as much as you can. Some of the greatest mod developers of Half-Life are either young people who practiced a lot or modding veterans that have spent decades honing their craft. Many of them did get to work for Valve or joined other AAA studios. Richard just needed more time to learn, more time to study game development. Prospekt could have been the start of a great legacy of Valve-approved fan games, but unfortunately, even though we got the chance twice, we shot ourselves in the foot both times. Since releasing Prospekt, Richard has been making other games, which from the screenshots actually look quite decent. All of this was just a case of a young man shooting for the moon, but instead of landing in the stars, he came back to Earth. Would I recommend anyone to try out Prospekt? No, not really. I would only suggest aspiring game developers to check it out to study this game and learn what went wrong, what could have been done much better. And that's pretty much it. Thanks to Skyclad for gifting me a copy of Prospekt. Thank you for watching, and a big thanks to these benefactors for supporting the channel. Unusual, Taylor, Wooflo, Scooms, Aoi, Nicholas Go, Imperial Embers, T-Boy301, Tombstone, Jack5282, Taiwanesium, Quiltman, 501st Clone Boy, Interloper CS, TTG, Robocop, Noel, Nobody Important, Franco Senlehi, Justin Imbergriff, Tedasaur, Otakon Nachos, Lamdre, Roadkill, Walter, Hobgobbies, NoClick, Geode, Fisher Grice, Hawkassault, Mistress Babon, Jelen, A Normal Street Lamp, TRR Droid, and Bipullet. Thanks again, and see you in the next one.